What you're about to hear changes everything we thought we knew about Skinwalker Ranch. For years, Dr. Travis Taylor, a man with multiple doctorates in aerospace engineering, optical science, and physics, has led the scientific investigation at America's most mysterious property. He's worked on classified government projects. He's investigated advanced propulsion systems for the Department of Defense. He's someone who demands proof, who insists on repeatability, who approaches every anomaly with rigorous skepticism. But something has shifted. In recent statements and on-camera moments from The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, Dr. Taylor has begun acknowledging something he spent years avoiding, something the data has forced him to accept. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't belief. This was evidence, cold and repeatable, pushing him toward a conclusion that even he finds disturbing. Within the scientific community, and among those who follow the investigation closely, the change in his language has been impossible to miss. He's no longer just documenting anomalies. He's no longer simply saying we need more data. He's acknowledging intelligence behind the phenomena, purpose, awareness, response. And for someone with his credentials, someone with everything to lose by making extraordinary claims, that acknowledgement represents a profound shift. Subscribe now, because what follows will challenge your understanding of what's possible at this 512-acre property in northeastern Utah. Let's establish exactly who Dr. Travis Taylor is, because without understanding his background, you can't fully appreciate the significance of what he's now saying. This isn't a paranormal enthusiast who finally found evidence for his beliefs. This isn't someone with a pre-existing agenda looking for validation. This is a scientist whose entire career has been built on skepticism and evidence-based analysis. Dr. Taylor holds a doctorate in optical science and engineering from the University of Alabama. He holds another doctorate in aerospace systems engineering. He has a master's degree in physics, another in astronomy, and another in mechanical and aerospace engineering. He's worked on advanced propulsion systems. He's contributed to missile defense programs. He's been involved in classified projects that required the highest security clearances. When History Channel brought him to Skinwalker Ranch, they needed someone who would push back against wild theories, someone who would demand scientific rigor, someone who would protect the integrity of the investigation even if it made for less dramatic television. And that's exactly what he did for years. He questioned everything. He insisted on controlled experiments. He looked for mundane explanations first: equipment malfunction, environmental factors, human error. He installed sophisticated monitoring equipment across the ranch, spectrum analyzers to detect electromagnetic frequencies, radiation detectors to measure energy signatures, high-speed cameras to capture phenomena too fast for the human eye, GPS sensors to track spatial anomalies. He approached every strange occurrence with the same skepticism he would apply to any scientific investigation. Watch the early seasons and you'll see him constantly pumping the brakes on speculation, suggesting conventional explanations, insisting on more data before drawing conclusions. So when someone like Travis Taylor, someone with everything to lose by making claims he can't back up, begins speaking more openly about encountering phenomena that challenge our understanding of physics, you have to ask yourself what exactly forced his hand. What data became so overwhelming that continuing to deny it would be intellectually dishonest? What patterns emerged that even the ultimate skeptic had to acknowledge? In the early seasons of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, strange things happened, but they were isolated incidents, individual anomalies that, taken one at a time, could be explained away or filed under needs more investigation. A UAP sighting here, an electromagnetic spike there, equipment failure, unusual radiation readings. Each incident by itself had possible explanations. But science isn't about individual events. It's about patterns. It's about seeing the same thing happen multiple times under controlled conditions. It's about ruling out coincidence and finding genuine correlations. And that's when things at Skinwalker Ranch got disturbing, because the team began documenting recurring anomalies that weren't just random weirdness. UAP sightings weren't random. They appeared in specific locations at predictable intervals. They showed up during certain types of experiments. They manifested in response to specific stimuli. Electromagnetic field spikes correlated with GPS failures. Not sometimes, consistently. When they detected unusual EMF readings, their GPS systems would show impossible coordinates, positions that placed them hundreds of feet from where they were actually standing. Radiation bursts occurred in conjunction with visual phenomena. They'd see something unusual in the sky, and simultaneously their radiation detectors would spike. Equipment didn't just fail randomly. It failed when they were investigating specific areas of the ranch. Certain locations triggered consistent patterns of malfunction. Cameras would shut off, batteries would drain, electronics would reset. What started as unexplained events became repeated repeatable phenomena. Data points aligned across time, location, and experimental conditions. The phenomena weren't just happening to them, they were happening in response to their investigations. When you drill in a certain area, radiation spikes. Every time. When you launch rockets towards certain coordinates, UAPs appear. When you use certain frequencies, equipment malfunctions, specific, predictable, repeatable patterns. Dr. Taylor couldn't ignore the correlation. When you see the same pattern emerge over and over, when you can predict outcomes based on inputs, when the relationship between action and response becomes statistically significant, you're no longer looking at coincidence. You're looking at a system with rules, a system that responds predictably to specific inputs. And that realization changed everything. There comes a moment in every scientific investigation when the data becomes undeniable. When you've exhausted every rational explanation, tested every mundane hypothesis, ruled out every conventional possibility. For Dr. Taylor and his team, that moment came during experiments where the readings exceeded not just their expectations but safe thresholds. They measured radiation levels that should not exist in that environment, not slightly elevated readings that might be explained by natural sources, massive spikes that had no conventional source, electromagnetic frequencies that don't match any known transmission, commercial, military, or natural, GPS coordinates shifting by hundreds of feet, while equipment remained completely stationary, energy signatures that violated our understanding of how physics should work in that space. Watch his reactions in recent seasons, the pauses before he speaks, the careful choice of words, the moments where he stops mid-sentence, processing what he's seeing, searching for a conventional explanation, and coming up empty. He doesn't say this is impossible. He says this shouldn't be happening. He doesn't say this violates the laws of physics. He says this is inconsistent with our current understanding. These distinctions matter. They're the words of a scientist who's seeing something that challenges conventional knowledge but who isn't ready to completely abandon the scientific framework, because what they were measuring shouldn't coexist. You can't have those radiation signatures without a source. You can't have those electromagnetic patterns without generation equipment. You can't have GPS anomalies of that magnitude without massive gravitational interference or sophisticated jamming. And yet there they were, documented, repeatable, undeniable, captured by multiple independent sensor systems. This wasn't one sensor giving a bad reading. They were seeing correlated anomalies across multiple sensor types. When the radiation spiked, the EMF detectors also showed unusual readings. When the GPS failed, they also saw visual phenomena, multiple independent systems detecting something at the same time. At this point, Skinwalker Ranch stopped behaving like a piece of land with unusual properties. It started behaving like a system with inputs and outputs, a system that responded to their actions, a system that seemed to follow rules, even if those rules didn't match anything in conventional physics, a system that, terrifyingly, seemed to be aware of what they were doing and responding to it. And this is where everything changes. In recent statements, Dr. Travis Taylor has made a fundamental shift in how he discusses the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch. It's subtle. If you're not paying close attention, you might miss it. But for those who've followed his journey, it's seismic. He no longer treats the phenomena as random environmental anomalies. He's not discussing unusual geological formations or atmospheric conditions. He no longer frames them as unexplained natural occurrences that science will eventually understand. Instead, Dr. Taylor now openly acknowledges that what they're dealing with exhibits signs of intelligence. Not consciousness necessarily, not sentience in the way we usually think about it, but intelligence, purpose, awareness, response. He talks about the phenomena responding to their experiments, not just happening during experiments, responding, as if whatever they're dealing with is aware of what they're doing and choosing how to react. He discusses patterns of behavior that suggest awareness, not just patterns in data, but patterns of behavior. That word choice is crucial. Rocks don't behave, energy doesn't behave, physical phenomena don't behave. Things with awareness, things with intelligence, things that can make choices, those things behave. He references reactions that appear deliberate, purposeful, as if whatever they're studying is trying to achieve specific outcomes. This is a massive departure from early seasons where every strange occurrence was met with, "We need more data," or "There must be a natural explanation." Now the data is the explanation, the patterns they've documented, the responses they've measured, the behaviors they've observed. That's what's explaining everything else. And if there's intelligence behind these phenomena, that means something is aware of their presence. Something knows they're there. Something is watching them investigate. And intelligence implies intent. If something is intelligent, if it's making choices about how to respond to their investigations, then it has reasons for those choices. It has purposes. It has goals. cycles, which means everything that's happened at Skinwalker Ranch might not be random. The equipment failures, the phenomena that appear and disappear, the patterns of activity they've documented, all of it might be intentional. But why here? Why this specific 512-acre property in northeastern Utah? The answer might lie in the geography itself. Skinwalker Ranch sits in a basin surrounded by mesas. Beneath the surface, ground-penetrating radar has revealed massive underground structures, cavities, tunnels, possibly even chambers that shouldn't exist in that geological formation. The ranch sits on what appears to be a unique convergence point, magnetic anomalies that don't match expected patterns, unusual mineral deposits that create natural waveguides for electromagnetic energy, geological features that might act as natural resonators or amplifiers, creating specific electromagnetic or gravitational properties. But here's what's truly unsettling. Similar phenomena have been reported at other locations around the world, other basins, other areas with unusual geology, other places with magnetic anomalies. But they're weaker, less consistent, less intense. Other sites show UAP activity, strange electromagnetic readings, but Skinwalker Ranch is different in both degree and kind. The concentration of activity is unprecedented. At other locations, you might see one type of phenomenon. At Skinwalker Ranch, you see all of it. UAPs, radiation spikes, electromagnetic anomalies, GPS failures, equipment malfunctions, physical effects on people and animals, all happening in the same location, sometimes simultaneously. The repeatability is disturbing. They can design experiments and predict with disturbing accuracy what's going to happen. It's as if Skinwalker Ranch isn't just a location where strange things happen. It's a hub, a focal point, a nexus. If other locations with similar phenomena are like small towns, Skinwalker Ranch is like a major metropolitan area. And that raises the most dangerous question yet. A hub for what? What kind of activity? What kind of intelligence? Serving what purpose? But investigating Skinwalker Ranch isn't just intellectually challenging, it's dangerous. Over the course of the investigation, team members have reported physical effects that can't be dismissed as coincidence. Burns with no apparent source, actual radiation burns that appear suddenly, sudden illness after exposure to certain areas, disorientation severe enough to require medical attention. Dr. Taylor himself has experienced health issues during investigations, headaches that appear suddenly when in certain areas, feelings of pressure or disorientation, physical symptoms that correlate with specific experimental activities. Other team members have been hospitalized. Some have developed symptoms that medical professionals struggle to explain, conditions that don't match known illnesses or injuries. And Dr. Taylor now openly acknowledges what he once downplayed. There are real safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch. He talks about implementing new protocols, formal procedures for limiting exposure to certain areas, requirements for protective equipment, rules about how long team members can work in specific zones, mandatory medical monitoring. Because here's the terrifying implication. If the phenomena exhibit intelligence, and if that intelligence has demonstrated the ability to affect physical matter and biological systems, then studying it too closely might not just reveal answers, it might provoke a response. What happens when observation itself becomes a trigger? When your very presence, your equipment, your experiments provoke responses that can harm you. So why is Dr. Travis Taylor speaking more openly now? After years of careful language and measured responses, why this shift? The answer is simple. The evidence left no room for silence. When the data becomes overwhelming, when the patterns become undeniable, when the phenomena become too consistent to ignore, continuing to deflect becomes intellectually dishonest. Dr. Taylor has always balanced two competing forces: the scientific responsibility to report what you observe and the fear of being misinterpreted or sensationalized. For years, he erred on the side of caution. Better to say nothing than to say something that might be misunderstood. But there comes a point where staying silent does more harm than speaking up, where the integrity of the investigation demands transparency. The mounting evidence, season after season, experiment after experiment, has created a body of work that can no longer be explained away. They have the data, years of it, terabytes of measurements, observations under controlled conditions, repeated experiments with consistent results. At some point, we need more data stops being scientific caution and becomes avoidance. At some point, you have to acknowledge what the data is telling you. But here's what's really unsettling. If this is only what Dr. Dr. Taylor is willing to say publicly, on camera, in a format that will be broadcast to millions of people? What has he seen that he still can't talk about? What data exists that's even more disturbing? Because make no mistake, what he's saying publicly represents the minimum that intellectual honesty allows him to acknowledge. So what happens next? If Dr. Taylor's acknowledgement represents a turning point, what does that mean for the ongoing investigation? First, understand that the investigation is escalating. New protocols are being implemented. More sophisticated equipment is being deployed. The team is approaching the ranch with a level of seriousness that goes beyond scientific curiosity. Because here's the shift that's occurred. This is no longer about understanding the phenomena. It's about containment. Containment means you're dealing with something potentially dangerous, something that needs to be controlled, managed, kept from spreading or escalating. Dr. Taylor's shift in language reflects this. He's moved from curiosity-driven investigation to risk assessment mode. He talks about managing the phenomena rather than simply documenting it. When a scientist stops trying to reveal something and starts trying to contain it, that tells you everything about how dangerous they believe it to be. You don't contain things that are merely interesting. You contain things that pose risks. And here's another disturbing possibility. The ranch may not be trying to reveal its secrets. It may be testing boundaries, testing what the team will tolerate, testing how far it can push, testing whether they'll continue investigating despite the risks. If the phenomena are intelligent and purposeful, then this makes sense. You don't just passively allow yourself to be studied, you study back. Dr. Travis Taylor entered Skinwalker Ranch as a skeptic, a scientist determined to apply rigorous methodology to extraordinary claims, someone who would demand proof before accepting the impossible. And for years he maintained that skepticism. He pushed back, he questioned, he demanded repeatability. But now he's acknowledging intelligence behind the phenomena. He's talking about responses, patterns, and behaviors that suggest awareness. He's implementing safety protocols not for natural disasters, but for something that reacts to human presence. This isn't belief, this isn't faith, this isn't speculation, this is forced acknowledgement. Dr. Travis Taylor didn't want this conclusion. He didn't set out to prove the paranormal. He went to Skinwalker Ranch to debunk it, but the data wouldn't let him. The patterns wouldn't stop forming. The phenomena wouldn't stop responding. The evidence wouldn't stop accumulating until he reached a point where continuing to deny it would be intellectually dishonest. So here's the final chilling thought. If the phenomenon at Skinwalker Ranch is intelligent, if it responds to investigation, if it exhibits patterns that suggest awareness, then it knows we're watching. It knows every experiment they run, every sensor they place, every measurement they take. It's aware of their presence, their activities, their attempts to understand it. And it always has, from the very first moment they set foot on that ranch, from the first sensor they installed, from the first experiment they conducted. It was aware, watching, waiting, which means that everything that's happened, every anomaly, every equipment failure, every injury, every phenomenon they've documented might not be random occurrence. It might all be intentional, chosen, deliberate responses from something that knows it's being studied and has decided how to react to that study. And that raises the most disturbing question of all. If it's been aware of them this entire time, if it's been choosing how to respond to their investigations, if everything they've experienced has been intentional, what is it trying to tell them? Or perhaps more terrifyingly, what is it trying to prevent them from discovering? During a laser experiment on Skinwalker Ranch, crew members were physically attacked by an unknown force. Dr. Travis Taylor was thrown backward. Eric Bard collapsed with radiation exposure. Multiple injuries required hospitalization. Medical records confirmed the damage. The footage captured it all. Subscribe for the full investigation into what attacked Brandon Fugel's team. The investigation that would result in the most violent incident in Skinwalker Ranch history began with what seemed like a straightforward scientific experiment designed by Dr. Travis Taylor to test a controversial hypothesis about the anomaly zone above the property. For months, the team had documented strange phenomena occurring in the airspace directly above the mesa. Unexplained radar returns, GPS failures, and electromagnetic disturbances that defied conventional explanation. Travis theorized that whatever caused these anomalies might be responsive to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, particularly high-powered laser emissions in the infrared spectrum. Brandon Fugel approved a significant budget expenditure to acquire military-grade laser equipment capable of projecting concentrated beams into the anomaly zone at precise frequencies Travis had calculated based on previous sensor data. The experiment was ambitious and potentially groundbreaking. If successful, it could provide the first reproducible method for triggering and studying the phenomena under controlled conditions rather than waiting for spontaneous occurrences. The setup took an entire day, with Travis personally overseeing the installation of laser arrays, sensor equipment, and recording devices positioned across the mesa to capture data from multiple angles simultaneously. Brandon invited additional scientific observers, including physicists and aerospace engineers, to witness the experiment and provide independent verification of results. The atmosphere was one of excitement and anticipation rather than concern. Nobody on the team believed they were doing anything particularly dangerous. They'd conducted dozens of experiments at the ranch without incident, and this seemed like just another data collection opportunity using more sophisticated equipment than previous investigations. The experiment was scheduled for early evening when atmospheric conditions were optimal and the setting sun wouldn't interfere with laser visibility. As the team assembled on the mesa and Travis began the activation sequence for the laser array, everyone felt confident this would be a routine scientific investigation that might yield interesting data. Within minutes, that confidence would be shattered as something responded to their laser emissions with immediate and violent hostility. The footage from that evening shows the exact moment when scientific curiosity crossed a boundary into genuine danger, triggering a response from whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at Skinwalker Ranch that proved it could and would defend itself against perceived threats with physical force. Dr. Travis Taylor was operating the primary laser control station, making fine adjustments to beam frequency and intensity while monitoring real-time sensor feedback displayed on multiple laptop screens arrayed before him. The footage shows Travis focused intently on his work, calling out technical observations to the team about electromagnetic readings that were beginning to spike in ways consistent with his theoretical predictions. For approximately 8 minutes, the experiment proceeded exactly as planned. The lasers were projecting into the anomaly zone, sensors were collecting data, and cameras were recording everything from multiple angles for later analysis. Then something changed. Travis noticed a sudden surge in electromagnetic readings that exceeded anything the equipment was designed to measure, causing several sensors to overload and shut down automatically. He reached for the laser controls to reduce power output, concerned that the equipment was malfunctioning or that they were inadvertently creating a feedback loop. Before Travis could touch the controls, he was violently struck by an invisible force that witnesses describe as impossibly powerful. The camera footage captures the moment in disturbing clarity. Travis is standing normally one instant, then the next. He's thrown backwards several feet, as if hit by a massive unseen impact. His body leaves the ground entirely before crashing into equipment behind him with enough force to damage the metal cases and cause Travis to cry out in obvious pain. The entire incident occurs in less than 2 seconds, but the violence and power behind whatever struck him is undeniable on the footage. Team members rushed to Travis immediately, finding him dazed and struggling to breathe from what appeared to be blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. When they helped him to his feet and examined him, visible injuries were already forming, dark bruising across his torso in a pattern that suggested impact from a large focused force rather than falling against equipment edges. Travis insisted he hadn't tripped or lost his balance. Something had physically hit him with tremendous power from a direction where nothing visible existed on any camera angle. Brandon Fugel made the immediate decision to shut down the laser array and secure Travis medical attention, but before the team could begin powering down equipment, the situation escalated dramatically as additional crew members came under attack. Eric Bard was positioned approximately 30 yards from Travis at a secondary monitoring station, collecting spectrographic data and observing atmospheric changes during the laser experiment. When Travis was attacked, Eric had immediately started moving toward him to provide assistance, but before he'd covered half the distance, he suddenly stopped, staggered, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and upper body. The footage shows Eric's collapse happening within seconds of Travis being struck, suggesting a coordinated assault on multiple team members rather than isolated incidents. Crew members who reached Eric first found him in severe distress. He was vomiting. His skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and he reported intense burning sensations across his exposed skin areas, including his face, neck, and hands. The symptoms were consistent with acute radiation exposure, which seemed impossible given that no radiation sources were present in the experiment beyond normal background levels. Eric was clearly in worse condition than Travis, unable to stand without support and exhibiting signs of shock, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, and disorientation about where he was and what had happened. Brandon ordered immediate evacuation and called for emergency medical response, recognizing this had escalated beyond anything the team's first aid training could handle. While waiting for paramedics, team members noticed something disturbing. Eric's exposed skin areas were developing visible burns that appeared to be progressing in real time, starting as redness but darkening to second-degree burn appearance within minutes.
minutes. Medical equipment the team had on site for monitoring crew health during investigations revealed elevated radiation readings on Eric's body and clothing that exceeded safe exposure limits. This was medically impossible. Radiation doesn't spontaneously appear on a person without a source, and there were no radioactive materials anywhere near the experiment site. When paramedics arrived and transported Eric to the hospital, emergency room physicians were baffled by his presentation. The burns, radiation readings, and systemic symptoms were consistent with significant radiation exposure, yet there was no logical source for such exposure. Eric's condition stabilized after several hours of treatment, but the medical mystery of how he'd been exposed to radiation in the middle of a Utah desert remained completely unexplained. The incident proved that whatever had attacked Travis hadn't stopped with a single victim. It had systematically targeted multiple team members with different forms of assault.
Brandon Fugel stood on the mesa watching two of his team members injured and possibly dying, facing the most difficult decision of his tenure as Skinwalker Ranch owner. As a successful businessman accustomed to calculated risks and data-driven decisions, Brandon now confronted a situation where no amount of wealth, planning, or expertise could guarantee his team's safety against threats that defied scientific explanation. His first instinct was immediate evacuation, get everyone off the mesa, shut down all experiments, and regroup once injuries were assessed and medical professionals provided guidance. But the scientist part of Brandon recognized they were documenting something unprecedented. Whatever had attacked Travis and Eric had responded to their experiment in ways that proved intelligence, awareness, and capability for physical interaction with humans. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough evidence the ranch had been seeking for decades, and abandoning the investigation meant potentially losing data that could never be replicated. The ethical calculation was brutal. Continue collecting data while people were being injured, or prioritize immediate safety over scientific discovery. Brandon made calls to medical consultants describing Eric's symptoms, seeking guidance on whether they were dealing with a medical emergency requiring immediate hospital transport or something that could be managed on-site while securing equipment and data. The responses were alarming. Radiation exposure severe enough to cause visible burns and systemic symptoms required immediate professional medical intervention and potentially weeks of monitoring for delayed effects, including organ damage and immune system compromise. There was no ethical justification for keeping Eric on the mesa 1 second longer than necessary for safe transport. Travis, despite his own injuries and obvious pain, argued for continuing the experiment. He recognized the scientific importance of what they were documenting and believed they could implement safety protocols to protect remaining team members while collecting additional data. Brandon overruled him, making the definitive call to shut down all equipment and evacuate to the command center. But even that decision proved complicated when something began attacking from above, making evacuation itself dangerous. Brandon found himself coordinating a retreat under hostile conditions from an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't defend against using any conventional security measures. His background in real estate development and business management had prepared him for financial risks and complex negotiations, not tactical evacuation of personnel under assault from unexplained phenomena. As the team began shutting down equipment and preparing to evacuate the mesa, the attacks escalated in a way that suggested whatever they'd provoked was determined to prevent them from leaving, or perhaps to punish them for the laser experiment. Multiple crew members reported feeling impacts from above, not gentle touches or subjective sensations, but forceful strikes that knocked equipment from their hands and caused them to stumble or fall. The camera footage captures several incidents where objects and people appear to be struck by invisible forces from the empty sky above. One particularly dramatic sequence shows a heavy metal equipment case being lifted off the ground and thrown laterally across the mesa, traveling at least 15 feet before crashing down and breaking open. No wind, no visible force, just the case suddenly airborne and violently displaced. Physics alone made this impossible. The case weighed over 40 pounds and would require significant force applied at precise angles to achieve the trajectory captured on video. Crew members scrambled to secure equipment and themselves as the aerial assault continued. Sound equipment recorded bizarre audio during this period, deep rumbling sounds that seemed to come from directly overhead despite clear skies, high-pitched whining noises that hurt team members' ears and couldn't be isolated to any equipment source. and what several people described as a rhythmic pulsing that they felt physically in their chests, like standing near massive subwoofers at a concert. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested intelligence. Different crew members were being targeted with different types of assault simultaneously, as if something was observing their positions and choosing appropriate methods to harass or injure each person. Brandon's security personnel attempted to provide protection, but were helpless against threats they couldn't see or predict. One security officer was struck hard enough to knock his radio from his belt, the device skittering across the mesa as if kicked by an invisible foot. Another reported feeling hands pushing against his back, trying to force him toward the mesa's edge, though no one was near him, and footage confirmed he was isolated from other team members. The psychological terror of being under attack from unseen forces was as damaging as the physical impacts. Trained security professionals accustomed to assessing and responding to threats found themselves completely ineffective against an enemy that violated every assumption about how physical reality operates. While chaos unfolded on the mesa, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton and Chief Security Officer Bryant Arnold were positioned at the ranch perimeter, monitoring access points and maintaining communication with the investigation team. Their experience that night proved the attacks weren't confined to the Mesa experiment site, but were happening simultaneously across different areas of the property. Thomas was conducting a routine perimeter check in his vehicle when he reported via radio that he was being followed by something he couldn't see, but could hear moving through brush parallel to the road. The sound was too large and too coordinated to be wildlife, and it maintained pace with his vehicle even as he accelerated. When Thomas stopped to investigate with spotlights, he saw nothing. But the moment he turned off his vehicle's lights, he heard what he described as footsteps approaching his position from multiple directions simultaneously, as if he was being surrounded. His radio transmission to Bryant captured genuine fear in his voice as he requested immediate backup. Bryant responded in his security vehicle but experienced catastrophic equipment failure en route. His radio cut out mid-transmission. His vehicle's electrical system began malfunctioning with lights flickering and engine sputtering, and his GPS navigation showed his location as somewhere over 100 miles away. Despite being on ranch property he'd driven countless times, the equipment failures left Bryant stranded and unable to reach Thomas or communicate with the command center. Both men were effectively isolated in darkness on a property where something was demonstrating hostile intent toward the investigation team. The most terrifying aspect of their experience was the physical attacks they endured while separated and vulnerable. Thomas reported being shoved hard enough to stumble while standing outside his vehicle trying to restart his radio. He felt distinct pressure against his chest and shoulders, as if invisible hands were pushing him. And when he retreated into his vehicle and turned on interior lights, he discovered fresh scratches on his arms that were bleeding and stinging. Bryant had similar experiences. Objects in his vehicle were knocked from their positions. His rearview mirror was violently twisted sideways, and he felt repeated impacts against the vehicle's exterior as if something was striking the doors and hood with considerable force. The radio eventually came back online with Bryant and Thomas both reporting to Brandon that they were under attack and requesting permission to evacuate the property entirely. The physical evidence from the Skinwalker Ranch attacks provided undeniable proof that something had caused genuine harm to multiple team members, documented through medical records that would stand up to legal and scientific scrutiny. Eric Bard's hospital evaluation revealed radiation exposure levels that triggered mandatory reporting to federal authorities who monitor such incidents for public safety and national security purposes. His radiation readings measured at levels consistent with proximity to industrial radioactive sources or medical radiation equipment, yet no such sources existed anywhere near the ranch during the experiment. The burns on Eric's skin were classified as second-degree thermal and radiation burns, requiring specialized treatment including topical medications and monitoring for infection. Blood work showed elevated white blood cell counts and other markers consistent with the body's response to radiation damage, effects that typically take hours or days to appear but manifested in Eric within minutes of exposure. Medical professionals who treated Eric documented their findings with the caveat that the exposure source remained unknown and unexplained, unusual language in medical records that typically identify specific causes for injuries. Travis Taylor's injuries were equally well documented, though different in nature. X-rays revealed soft tissue trauma across his chest and abdomen consistent with blunt force impact from a large object striking him with significant velocity. The bruising patterns were photographed and measured, showing an impact zone approximately 12 inches in diameter, centered on his sternum and spreading across his ribs. Sports medicine specialists consulted about the injuries compared them to impacts seen in football players hit by tackles or martial martial artists struck during full contact sparring, the kind of damage that requires substantial force delivered by something solid. What made Travis's injuries medically puzzling was the absence of corresponding external trauma. When someone is hit hard enough to cause that level of internal bruising, there's typically skin abrasions, cuts, or surface damage from whatever struck them. Travis had none of that. His skin was intact except for the deep bruising, as if he'd been hit by something that could deliver tremendous force without surface friction or cutting edges. Thomas Winterton and Bryant Arnold's scratches were examined by medical staff and photographed for documentation. The scratch patterns were analyzed and determined to be consistent with fingernail or claw marks rather than contact with equipment edges or vegetation. The injuries were fresh, appearing during the investigation period, and located on body areas that were covered by clothing when the men left the command center. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his own injuries, immediately began analyzing the data collected during the attack, determined to find scientific explanations for what had happened to him and his team members. His preliminary analysis revealed electromagnetic anomalies that correlated precisely with the timing of each physical attack, suggesting a connection between energy phenomena and the violence experienced by the crew. During the 8 minutes of laser operation before Travis was struck, sensors detected a progressive buildup of electromagnetic energy in the anomaly zone at frequencies that matched the laser emissions, but at amplitudes exponentially higher than what the equipment was producing. Travis theorized they'd inadvertently created a resonance effect where the laser energy was being amplified by something in the atmosphere or space above the mesa, building to levels that triggered a defensive or retaliatory response from whatever generates the phenomena. The moment of Travis's attack corresponded exactly with a massive electromagnetic pulse detected by equipment positioned around the mesa. The pulse registered across multiple sensor types simultaneously. Magnetometers, RF spectrum analyzers, and electric field detectors all recorded spikes that exceeded their measurement capabilities by orders of magnitude. The pulse originated from a point in the anomaly zone directly above where Travis was standing and propagated outward in a focused beam rather than radiating equally in all directions. This directional characteristic suggested intentional targeting rather than random energy discharge. Eric Bard's radiation exposure remained the most scientifically puzzling aspect because radiation detectors positioned around the mesa showed no elevated readings in the environment, only on Eric's body and clothing after his collapse. Travis hypothesized that Eric had been exposed to a highly localized and brief burst of radiation, intense enough to cause damage, but short-lived enough to dissipate before environmental sensors could detect it. This would require technology or natural phenomena capable of generating and directing radiation with precision that exceeded any known human capability. The aerial assault phase showed even more interesting data. High-speed cameras captured frame-by-frame sequences of objects being displaced, and careful analysis revealed subtle atmospheric distortions at the moment of impact, like heat shimmer or gravitational lensing effects that indicated something was present even if not directly visible. Travis believed they were observing camouflaged or phase-shifted matter that could interact physically with normal matter, while remaining largely invisible to human perception and most sensor types. The violent attacks during the Mesa experiment fundamentally transformed how Brandon Fugel approaches investigations at Skinwalker Ranch, implementing safety protocols that acknowledge the genuine physical dangers posed by whatever phenomena exist on the property. The most immediate change was mandatory medical monitoring for all personnel during investigations. Team members now wear biosensors that continuously track heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and radiation exposure, with real-time data transmitted to medical personnel stationed at the command center who can order immediate evacuation if dangerous physiological changes are detected. Brandon invested in a mobile medical unit permanently stationed at the ranch, equipped with emergency treatment capabilities and staffed by paramedics trained in radiation exposure response, trauma care, and psychological crisis intervention. The unit includes equipment to measure and document radiation levels on individuals, allowing immediate assessment of exposure risks. All investigation plans now undergo safety review by an independent committee including physicians, radiation safety experts, and security professionals who assess potential risks and recommend protective measures before experiments are approved. High-risk investigations require written, informed consent from all participants acknowledging specific dangers and agreeing they understand experiments might trigger hostile responses from unknown phenomena. Brandon also implemented tactical withdrawal protocols, predetermined evacuation routes, rally points, and communication procedures for situations where investigations need to be abandoned quickly under under potentially hostile conditions. Security personnel receive training in protecting team members from threats that may not be visible or predictable using conventional security methods. The psychological impact on team members has been significant and ongoing. Travis Taylor, despite being a trained scientist comfortable with uncertainty and unexplained phenomena, admits the experience changed his perspective on Skinwalker Ranch investigations. He's more cautious now about experiments that might be perceived as aggressive or threatening by whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at the ranch, recognizing that their laser experiment may have crossed a boundary that provoked retaliation. Some crew members requested transfers to other projects after witnessing the attacks, unwilling to continue working at a location where they might be physically harmed by forces they can't understand or defend against. Brandon has made counseling resources available to all staff and doesn't pressure anyone to participate in investigations they're uncomfortable with.
Just minutes ago, information surfaced about a private mansion connected to Brandon Fugel, a place rarely discussed and never meant to be examined this closely. What began as a routine walkthrough quickly shifted when investigators encountered areas that were never listed, rooms that didn't appear on any plans, and evidence that raised immediate concern. Within moments, access was restricted and recordings were halted. Tonight, we break down what was reportedly found, why it was quietly buried, and what it could mean moving forward. Subscribe now, because stories like this don't stay hidden for long, and once you see what was uncovered, you will understand why. The mansion tied to Brandon Fugel has always existed in a strange gray area. Publicly, it's described as nothing more than a private residence, another symbol of wealth and success. But those familiar with the property have long suggested that description barely scratches the surface. Unlike most high-end homes, this mansion was designed with layers of separation. Certain wings are isolated from the rest of the structure. Corridors subtly narrow, ceilings shift in height, and materials change in ways that feel deliberate rather than aesthetic. What immediately stands out is how little visual documentation exists. No detailed interior tours, no consistent floor plans. Even real estate records offer only broad outlines, lacking the specifics normally required for a property of this scale. People who have been inside describe a sense that the building wasn't designed to impress guests. It was designed to control movement. Sightlines are limited. Corners feel intentional. Sound behaves oddly in certain hallways, carrying farther than expected in some places and dying completely in others. More unsettling is the timeline. Portions of the mansion appear newer than official construction dates suggest, while other sections seem far older than they should be. Renovations were reportedly carried out in phases, often without public permits, creating internal spaces that don't align with original blueprints. This alone raises questions, but it's the purpose behind these alterations that matters most. Homes are built for living. Facilities are built for function, and this mansion leans heavily toward the latter. Those who reviewed partial layouts noticed entire sections labeled only with internal codes. No names, no descriptions. Rooms without windows. Storage areas without visible access points. Even stairwells that appear to lead somewhere but abruptly end behind sealed walls. These aren't accidents, they're choices. And choices like this usually reflect something being protected, studied, or kept out of sight. By the time investigators stepped inside, it was already clear this was not just a residence. It was an environment designed to limit what could be seen, where people could go, and how much they could understand at once. And that realization set the tone for everything that followed. Because if the mansion itself was built to hide something, the real question becomes simple and unsettling. What required this much secrecy in the first place? Entry into the mansion was originally approved under routine circumstances. The visit was framed as controlled, limited, and procedural, with clear boundaries established before anyone stepped inside. Specific rooms were cleared, specific paths were outlined, and specific areas were marked as off-limits, with no expectation that those restrictions would be challenged. At first, everything followed that plan. doors opened where they were supposed to. Lighting activated normally. Movement was calm, measured, and uneventful. Then, something shifted. Without warning, access systems behaved differently than expected. A secured door responded to credentials that should not have worked. Interior lighting activated in a corridor that was not listed on the access itinerary. According to those present, the change wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. A pause, a glance exchanged, the quiet realization that they were standing somewhere they had not been authorized to be. What made this moment disturbing wasn't just the mistake, it was the absence of alarms. No alerts triggered, no automated lockdown followed. Instead, the system allowed continued movement, almost as if the deviation had been anticipated. Those inside later described the feeling as being guided rather than lost, led forward by the structure itself. Hallways narrowed, sound softened. The atmosphere grew noticeably heavier the deeper they went. Attempts to verify location through internal maps failed. Digital layouts no longer matched physical space. What should have been a short connector hallway extended far longer than expected, ending at a door none of the personnel recognized. This door lacked standard labeling, no warnings, no identifiers, just a reinforced surface and a manual locking mechanism that suggested it was never meant for casual use. It was at this point that protocol began to unravel. Communication slowed, decisions were second-guessed, and an unspoken understanding settled over the group. Whatever lay beyond this point was not part of the original plan, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it stayed that way. Beyond the unauthorized door was a room that immediately altered the mood of everyone present. It was not large, but it felt compressed, as if the space resisted being occupied. The walls were bare, unfinished in places, yet intentionally reinforced in others. There were no windows, no obvious ventilation, and no furnishings to suggest comfort or long-term use. The lighting inside did not match the rest of the mansion. It was dimmer, colder, and oddly directional, casting shadows that seemed to bend rather than fall naturally. The first thing noticed was the sound. Voices behaved strangely in this room, carrying too clearly at times, and then vanishing altogether mid-sentence. Footsteps echoed with a delay that didn't match the size of the space. Even small movements felt amplified, while larger sounds seemed swallowed. Several devices began to malfunction almost immediately. Audio equipment produced static. Cameras struggled to maintain focus. One recorder shut off entirely without warning. Temperature readings showed inconsistencies as well. Certain areas of the room were noticeably colder, while others felt unnaturally warm, despite no visible heat source. When handheld sensors were moved through the space, readings spiked and dropped erratically, as if the room itself was interfering with measurement. This was not environmental drift. It was localized and repeatable. What unsettled the group most was the sense that the room was not abandoned. Dust patterns suggested recent activity, yet there were no footprints, no tools, no signs of ongoing work. It appeared maintained without being occupied, preserved rather than used. One individual later described the feeling as standing inside a container rather than a room, something designed to hold more than just people. At that moment, attention shifted from curiosity to caution. This space did not exist by accident. It had been built deliberately, hidden carefully, and separated from the rest of the mansion for a reason. And as the group stood there in silence, one thought became impossible to ignore. If this room was meant to stay unseen, then simply entering it may have already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Once the room was documented, attention shifted to what was stored within it. These were not decorative items, nor were they consistent with anything found elsewhere in the mansion. Along the walls sat containers made from mixed materials, some metallic, others composite, each sealed and unmarked. No labels, no serial numbers, nothing that suggested public manufacture or consumer use. Whatever these objects were, they had been intentionally stripped of identity. Several items appeared to be tools, but their design didn't align with conventional purposes. Edges were smoothed where grip would normally be unnecessary. Weight distribution felt unbalanced in ways that made handling awkward. A few pieces emitted a faint hum when lifted, subtle enough to be dismissed at first, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. surfaced. None of the items were powered, yet they behaved as if energy was present. More troubling was the condition of the storage itself. Everything was clean, not unused, but maintained. No corrosion, no dust buildup on the containers themselves. The surrounding floor showed signs of careful movement, as though items had been repositioned recently, then returned to precise locations. This wasn't forgotten storage. It was active without witnesses. Attempts to photograph certain objects resulted in distortion. Images appeared blurred or slightly offset, even when taken from close range. One device refused to save files altogether while pointed toward a specific container. When the lens was moved away, normal function returned. That behavior was repeated more than once. At this stage, the assumption that these were harmless materials collapsed. These objects served a purpose, and that purpose required privacy. They weren't trophies. They weren't collected curiosities. They were part of a process. And standing in that room, surrounded by items that resisted documentation, one conclusion became unavoidable. Whatever was happening inside this mansion was not meant to be explained. It was meant to continue uninterrupted. Once attention turned to documentation, the atmosphere inside the mansion shifted again. Cameras that had been operating without issue began to malfunction. One by one, recording devices stopped capturing usable data. Some powered down unexpectedly. Others continued running, but produced files that were either corrupted or completely empty when reviewed. At first, this was treated as technical failure. That explanation did not hold for long. Audio logs were the first to disappear. Timestamps remained, but the sound itself was gone, replaced by low static or silence. Video files showed brief moments of clarity before degrading into distortion. In several cases, recordings ended seconds before something came into frame, as if cut intentionally. No one recalled pressing stop. No commands were given. The footage simply ended. Shortly after, instructions were issued. Documentation was to pause. Certain areas were no longer to be filmed at all. Devices already used inside the restricted sections were collected and set aside, supposedly for review. Those devices were never returned in their original condition. Memory cards were wiped. Internal logs were missing. Even metadata had been altered in ways that suggested deliberate removal rather than system error. What stood out most was how quickly this response occurred. There was no confusion, no debate, no attempt to troubleshoot on site. The decision to restrict footage came immediately, as though the possibility had already been anticipated. Those present understood the message without it being stated directly. Whatever had been captured was not meant to exist outside that building. Later, when partial material surfaced, it was heavily edited. Transitions were abrupt. Key moments were absent. Context was removed. What remained felt sanitized, stripped of the very details that would explain why recording had been halted in the first place. At that point, it became clear that the most disturbing discovery was not a room or an object, but the reaction itself. You do not erase evidence unless it threatens something, and once footage is taken away, the story no longer belongs to those who witnessed it. As details from the mansion were quietly contained, attention turned to something harder to dismiss. The structure, the restrictions, and the response did not exist in isolation. Similar elements had appeared before, at locations connected to Brandon Fugel, each time following the same trajectory. Initial curiosity, limited access, anomalies that resisted explanation, then silence. Architectural features overlapped in troubling ways, reinforced interior spaces, inconsistent layouts, rooms excluded from public records. At each site, witnesses described a shift in tone once certain thresholds were crossed, as if permission itself had layers. Even the language used afterward remained consistent. Nothing unusual, no threat, no reason for concern. Statements that explained nothing while closing every door. What made this connection unsettling was repetition. One unusual property can be dismissed as coincidence. Two can be argued as bad luck. But multiple locations sharing the same design philosophy and the same pattern of restricted discovery suggest intention. Someone was not reacting to events as they occurred. They were responding according to a plan already in place. When timelines were compared, another detail emerged. Each incident followed a similar sequence of escalation, then containment. Access granted, then narrowed. Documentation allowed, then revoked. Individuals involved became quieter over time, their public remarks increasingly vague. No single event stood out as the breaking point, because the breaking point was built into the process. This realization reframed the mansion entirely. It was not the origin of something disturbing. It was one node in a larger network of controlled spaces, each designed to reveal only what was necessary and only to the right people. The mansion did not raise new questions. It confirmed old ones that had never been answered. At that stage, the investigation stopped being about what was found inside a building. It became about why the same discoveries kept happening in different places, under different circumstances, yet always ended the same way, quietly, deliberately, and without explanation. When those involved finally exited the mansion, the effects did not end at the gate. In the hours that followed, behavior began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. Conversations became shorter. Messages went unanswered. Individuals who had been vocal during the visit suddenly avoided specifics, speaking only in general terms or declining to comment altogether. No one argued. No one protested. Silence settled naturally, as if it had been agreed upon without words. In public settings, the shift was even more apparent. Interviews that had been scheduled were quietly postponed. When questions were asked, responses were careful and controlled, stripped of emotion and detail. Body language betrayed unease. Eyes drifted. Hands tightened. The confidence seen earlier was gone, replaced by restraint. Whatever had been encountered inside the mansion lingered, shaping reactions long after the physical distance grew. Privately, some participants reportedly requested to be removed from future involvement altogether. Others asked for reassignment away from similar environments. These were not dramatic exits. They were quiet withdrawals, framed as personal decisions or scheduling conflicts. Yet the timing was impossible to ignore. The mansion had been left behind, but its influence had not. What made these reactions troubling was their consistency. Different individuals, different roles, same response. No one contradicted the official narrative, yet no one reinforced it either. The absence of denial spoke louder than confirmation ever could. It suggested that speaking plainly carried consequences no one was willing to risk. By the time days passed, patterns hardened. Phones stayed silent. Statements stayed vague. No follow-ups came. The event was treated as concluded, yet no one acted relieved. The absence of closure became its own answer, hinting that what was seen could not be undone, ever. In the days that followed, the absence of explanation became impossible to ignore. No official statement clarified what had happened inside the mansion. No denial was issued, no confirmation was offered. Instead, there was a careful redirection of attention, a subtle shift away from specifics and toward broader, less threatening topics. Questions were acknowledged without being answered. The event was neither acknowledged nor disputed. It simply faded from public discussion. This type of response is rarely accidental. When something is harmless, it is dismissed openly. When something is misunderstood, it is explained. Silence, on the other hand, is reserved for situations where explanation creates more risk than secrecy. Addressing the discovery directly would have required acknowledging inconsistencies, missing footage, and restricted access, details that raise more questions than they resolve. What stood out most was how coordinated the silence appeared. Different voices, different platforms, same outcome. No leaks, no contradictions, no attempt to control the narrative aggressively, just a collective decision to let it dissolve. That restraint suggested confidence, not confusion, as if those responsible knew that time alone would bury the issue more effectively than confrontation ever could. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly continued, but none reached the public. The absence of even vague reassurance hinted that reassurance was not possible. Any explanation would have required admitting that something unexpected had been encountered, something that could not be neatly categorized or safely discussed. So instead, the story was allowed to remain unfinished. This refusal to address the discovery directly did not calm suspicion, it intensified it. Silence created space for interpretation, and that space grew larger with every unanswered question. The lack of closure became the most revealing detail of all, because when those in control choose choose not to speak, it is often because the truth does not belong to them alone, and once spoken, it cannot be contained again. When the mansion finally fell quiet, the most important detail was not what had been found, but what followed. The absence of explanation, the removal of evidence, and the coordinated silence all pointed toward a single conclusion. This discovery was not an anomaly, it was confirmation. Whatever existed inside that mansion was already understood by those in control, and exposure was the real threat. Viewed this way, every decision makes sense. Restricted access was not about safety, it was about containment. Missing footage was not accidental loss, it was deliberate protection. Silence was not confusion, it was strategy. The mansion functioned as a checkpoint, a place where something ongoing could be observed, stored, or managed without public interference. This reframes the entire narrative. The mansion was never meant to shock the public because it was never meant to be seen at all. It was designed to operate quietly, to exist without explanation, and to remain effective as long as curiosity stayed outside its walls. Once attention reached inside, the system responded exactly as it was built to. The unsettling truth is that nothing ended when the doors closed. Whatever process was underway did not stop. It simply moved beyond view again. The reaction was not damage control, it was maintenance. And that distinction matters because maintenance implies continuity. If this discovery teaches anything, it is that secrecy is not always about hiding danger. Sometimes it is about preserving function. Some environments are hidden not because they are unstable, but because they are working exactly as intended. And that leaves one final question lingering in the silence. If this was only one location, carefully managed and swiftly contained, how many others exist that have never been questioned at all? That possibility, once considered, makes the discovery feel far less isolated. Indeed, beneath the rugged terrain of Skinwalker Ranch lies a cabin investigators were never meant to find. A weather-beaten patrol shelter used by the ranch's head of security, known only as Dragon, has now been exposed as far more than a rest stop. What began as a routine patrol post unraveled into a classified containment chamber tied to decades-old psychological studies. What they dug up forced internal security to seal the site, possibly forever. Tonight, we uncover the truth hidden beneath the floorboards and why Dragon may have never been the guard. He was the test subject. Long before anyone on the current research team even knew it existed, the patrol cabin now associated with Dragon sat half-buried in silence at the farthest edge of Skinwalker Ranch. From a distance, it looked harmless, a faded structure with weather-beaten boards, a sagging corrugated roof, and a door that creaked in the wind like any forgotten storage shed meant for emergency supplies or feed sacks. Most new arrivals barely glanced at it. A building like that makes sense on a ranch often battered by storms. It blended in like a scar that time simply stopped noticing. But the silence surrounding it was louder than the wind that rattled its walls. The first sign something was off didn't come from inside, but from above. Years later, when aerial mapping was done for site monitoring, analysts noticed the cabin didn't appear on any historical construction record. No listing, no permits, no maintenance logs, nothing in prior land development files matched its presence. It was as if it wasn't supposed to be there. At first, staff assumed it had been added during the previous ownership transition. But when deeper archives were pulled, government land surveys from decades before showed that exact spot marked as Restricted Research Point, even before Skinwalker Ranch became public. Meaning, the cabin wasn't built where it made sense. It was built where something was already waiting. Satellite scans then revealed a second anomaly. The building's coordinates fell within a classified sensor monitoring zone, one that hadn't been disclosed during acquisition. Yet, no external power lines connected to it, no communications relay, nothing that explained why the site was flagged. Internal employees later admitted they ignored it at first because some locations on the ranch are better left undocumented. But that changed the day Dragon was assigned there, not to protect what was inside, but but to unknowingly interact with it. Because someone, somewhere, already knew that the cabin was never meant to serve people. It was meant to study them. When investigators finally entered the cabin with full structural clearance, their first observation was confusion. Ranch buildings are typically assembled with utility in mind: straight beams, salvaged lumber, visible nails, basic insulation. This cabin followed none of those conventions. The interior dimensions measured nearly 3 feet larger than the external foundation, an impossibility without intentionally engineered manipulation. Nails were embedded in spiral configurations rather than linear framing, indicating repeated internal reconstruction, not to repair weather damage, but to modify chamber layout. Someone had rebuilt parts of it from the inside many times, not due to decay, but precision. Underneath the rotting floorboards, something far more alarming emerged: industrial-grade electromagnetic grounding plates, the kind used in classified laboratory environments designed to prevent external signal interference or contamination of energy readings. These plates weren't just installed, they were anchored above soil that appeared chemically sterilized. Multiple layers of metallic shielding were positioned to block frequencies rather than protect from weather. No ranch utility shed would ever require that level of electromagnetic suppression. In fact, it shouldn't even be possible to install such technology that deep without formal contracting, heavy machinery, and recorded power logistics. Yet no construction files existed, no record of delivery trucks, no engineering correspondences, nothing. Environmental sensors inside the cabin displayed temperature fluctuations in exact 5-degree increments at scheduled intervals, regulated with precision akin to controlled lab testing. Dust drifted abnormally, collecting only on surfaces away from hidden sensor alignments. Even the air felt unnaturally dense, as though designed to transmit static memory rather than store humidity. According to sensory log reconstruction, the space behaved less like shelter and more like an active test chamber tuned to interact with living cognitive presence. When the engineering blueprints surfaced through partial digital recovery, the reality became undeniable. The cabin was not built to protect staff from ranch phenomena. It was built to maintain sustained exposure to it. A passive observation box, manipulated to seem harmless, yet designed like a waiting trap with layered influence circuitry embedded into every board and beam. The real question wasn't how it was built without anyone noticing. It was who approved constructing a psychological exposure chamber disguised as a ranch shack. Dragon officially joined the security division, believing his role was standard: monitoring restricted zones, tracking perimeter breaches, deterring trespassers. On paper, his assignment seemed logical. In reality, he had been marked for this role years earlier. Data reconstruction from decrypted research archives revealed that his employment file overlapped with psychological compatibility assessments from a retired Cold War behavioral project. Traits flagged as ideal for long-term exposure testing: emotional restraint, high observational focus, strict adherence to routine, minimal reactive behavior, were identical to what his recruitment form highlighted as professional strengths. This match was not accidental. He fit a pre-established test subject profile. Internal logs recovered beneath the cabin listed those traits under a column labeled Subject Stability Threshold, Phase 3, Qualification. His name never appeared in full. Instead, his initials were cross-referenced next to coded reference strings, suggesting he was evaluated long before he stepped onto the property. What he believed was a standard security screening actually mirrored historical psychological trial formatting from classified personnel conditioning program. Investigators reviewing this alignment stated that he was not hired because he was well-suited for security. He was placed because he was suited for influence induction. As months passed, changes in Dragon's personal logbook began reflecting subtle cognitive interference. Entries transitioned from precise, professionally structured reports to fragmented expressions of discomfort, short thoughts, Incomplete sentences, increased emotional weight without clear trigger. In isolated recordings, he described sensing shifts in his mood and physical energy when near the cabin. He began noting feelings of being observed without environmental stimuli, unsure whether the pressure came from the land or something within his mind. His handwriting became uneven in extended shifts, aligning with what earlier documents classified as optimal affective disorientation patterns. What makes Dragon's case uniquely tragic is that he never volunteered for any experiment. He never even knew one was occurring. When researchers finally gained system-level clearance to investigate beneath Dragon's patrol cabin, they assumed they'd uncover forgotten wiring, weather damage, or perhaps improperly stored supplies. Instead, lifting the warped floorboards revealed something that did not resemble standard construction at all. A rectangular panel sat embedded deeper than typical foundation depth, sealed with cold industrial bolts that matched no commercial ranch hardware. The bolts were consistent with those used on sealed transport cases for classified laboratory assets, designed to survive high pressure, intense heat, and electromagnetic fluctuation. The panel led to a reinforced metal compartment professionally fabricated and insulated. This was not a repair zone. It was an installation. Inside lay an evidence-style containment tray, organized with the precision of a forensic archive. Each item had been methodically placed, not casually stored. Thick, tinted evidence vials were labeled with non-standard identifiers like ANOMA, ANOMC, and Refuse Human Study. No dates, no signature field, just lettering consistent with internal cataloging codes used in discontinued research programs marked high-risk biocontainment. Next to the vials sat a folded Kevlar pad bearing dried stains. Surface samples returned structure patterns inconsistent with human or registered wildlife blood. Machine analysis flagged the material as unclassified biological origin. Bone fragments were also found, smooth, unnaturally dense, chemically resistant, and slightly luminous under infrared spectrum scanning. The size was too small for any known large fauna, yet density scans suggested impact resistance beyond normal evolutionary design. The final layer contained a microfilm envelope labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report. Its contents detailed electromagnetic exposure testing, cognitive response analytics, and radiation pattern tracking. The last page read, "Subject destabilized, threshold exceeded, terminate field sequence." When researchers found Dragon's personal logbook buried deep inside his patrol bag, they expected routine entries, weather updates, ranch security checks, gate scan. What they uncovered instead was the slow unraveling of a man who believed he was simply guarding property, unaware he was the one being studied. Early pages appeared normal: neat handwriting, precise notes on trail status, and motion sensor activation times. But midway through the journal, the tone shifted. Sentences grew shorter, words broke apart, handwriting slanted unevenly as if written with a shaking hand. And then, the timestamps began contradicting themselves. Several entries repeated the exact same minute, but described different emotional states each time. One line read, 0317, felt normal. The next, 0317, pressure behind eyes, like something pushing thoughts into place. Some timestamps were marked days into the future, others looping backwards, mirroring what was later discovered in the compromised security footage. It was as if time inside Dragon's memory didn't follow the outside world. More disturbing were the margin notes. They looked like medical-style observations, written in smaller, more controlled script, as if someone else had added them later. But forensic analysis confirmed it was Dragon's handwriting, only written while his brain was under intense stress. The notes referenced forced cognitive shifting, emotional override, recall disruption patterns. At first, investigators thought he was documenting symptoms. Later, they realized he was mirroring language found in the microfilm experiments beneath the cabin. One passage stopped the review team cold. "Something watches from inside the walls, not with eyes. It waits for me to react before it does. I dream of walking away, away, but wake up standing in the doorway. The breakthrough came when analysts overlaid Dragon's emotional peaks, recorded in his logbook, with electrical and energy fluctuation reports from devices installed unknowingly inside the cabin wall. What the team discovered still causes silence whenever it's mentioned in internal briefing. Each time Dragon documented a spike in stress, confusion, or sudden emotional collapse, the structural monitoring systems registered sharp electromagnetic surges at the exact same timestamp, down to the second. This meant the environment was not only reacting to him, it appeared to be tracking his mental state in real time. Archived data from the recovered files showed layout diagrams of the cabin labeled Anchor Zone, Cognitive Trigger Line, and Exposure Conduit. These were not ordinary structural markers. They matched terms used during classified Cold War field research involving prolonged isolation and interaction with non-standard environmental stimuli. The cabin, according to these blueprints, wasn't intended to protect him. It was built to encourage contact with an unseen influence. Further review found audio interference synchronized with Dragon's log entries. In recordings captured during his patrols, low-frequency pulses appeared intermittently whenever he expressed heightened fear in writing. Special sound analysis revealed nearly inaudible human-like resonance waves layered beneath the low hum. When separated digitally, these pulses formed rhythm patterns resembling neural response triggers used in cognitive field tests. That meant whatever was affecting him wasn't random. It was behaving as though it was responding. But the most alarming finding wasn't found in audio or electrical logs. It came from thermal mapping scans conducted months after his final entry. The scans revealed a consistent temperature dip, exactly 5 degrees, for 7-minute intervals, matching the precision of Dragon's behavior shifts mentioned in his journal. Exact timing, exact change, every single day. What the team uncovered next was something that had never been discussed on camera, not during official briefings, not even behind closed doors on the ranch. When experts finally processed the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, the contents shattered any remaining assumption that Dragon was merely the first person affected. It revealed there was a previous subject, someone who was never supposed to be mentioned again. The report, dated decades earlier, described an experimental phase that took place long before Skinwalker Ranch became known to the public. The subject was placed in a structure almost identical to Dragon's cabin. Same electromagnetic grid layout, same internal dimensions, same proximity to the anomaly. But unlike Dragon, that individual was not monitored openly. They were monitored remotely. And according to the final line of the failure report, contact escalation exceeded psychological tolerance threshold, resulting in systemic collapse. Nowhere did it mention a rescue attempt. Even more disturbing, temperature logs, behavioral field responses, and radiation interference patterns from that abandoned test perfectly mirrored Dragon's data nearly 40 years later. This implied that whatever force was interacting with him didn't just recognize the setup, it remembered it. It was behaving as if the experiment had restarted. Handwritten in the margin of one microfilm page were the words, "Pattern persists. Entity preference indicates continuity." That simple phrase terrified analysts. It meant what was being studied might not be reacting randomly. It was showing recognition. And then, just beneath that phrase, a final note in faded ink. Subject history must remain undisclosed. Current anchor unaware of precedent. The discovery of the envelope marked "If I don't come back" shifted the entire investigation from scientific analysis into something deeply personal and terrifying. It was not stored inside the locker, where evidence was meant to be kept. Instead, it was hidden behind a thin wooden panel near the back wall, like someone wanted it to remain secret unless things reached a point where returning was no longer an option. The message inside was short, written in Jason Dragon's own handwriting, but it read like the words of someone who no longer trusted his thoughts. He didn't speak about threats the way investigators expected. He didn't refer to a creature or a presence or even a direct danger. Instead, his message described a shift inside himself. He wrote that he began waking up in the cabin without remembering ever lying down. He felt emotional responses that did not match what he was thinking. And most chilling, He believed something was trying to learn through him. He described moments where he felt drawn back toward the cabin after leaving, like his instincts had been reprogrammed. At one point he wrote, "When my mind goes quiet, I feel it try to speak through the silence." That sentence alone broke several researchers emotionally. Next to the note was a small folded photo. It showed Dragon standing outside the cabin during normal patrol, appearing calm and focused. But what was handwritten on the back made experts question whether the person in the picture was even the same man who wrote the letter. The words read, "This is me," before the cabin noticed. The note ended with one final warning, left like a desperate instruction. Do not enter alone. The cabin does not forget who it watches. The final breakthrough came not from letters or hidden compartments, but from the last working camera pointed at the patrol cabin. At first glance, the recordings appeared normal. Quiet nights, still wind, empty ground. But just days before Dragon stopped showing up to work, the footage began displaying anomalies that experts still cannot explain. Time didn't move forward or backward. It began replaying itself differently. A minute of footage would play, then rewind, then repeat. But each time, tiny changes appeared. A rock that had been on one side of the frame would shift inches, even feet, without any visible movement. Tree branches bent at angles differing between loops. In one sequence, the cabin appeared wider than before, and then narrower in the next loop, despite never physically changing. The strangest clip showed a metal toolbox near the entrance, a toolbox that, according to team logs, was not placed there until 3 days after the timestamp on the recording. It was labeled as reverse time footage, reality recorded from the future. When researchers slowed the footage frame by frame, they noticed faint flashes along the screen edges, not camera glare, not insects, and not weather interference. The shapes matched the symbols found in the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, almost like whatever this was, it was trying to communicate. Soon after, things escalated. In one recording, the shadow of the camera pole began to fade until it disappeared altogether, even though the real pole was still standing outside. Then the entire image turned black. No error codes, no static, no signal loss, just silence. Over the next 24 hours, every camera facing the cabin stopped working the same way. Not because the devices broke, because something stopped allowing them to see. The decision was made to seal the cabin permanently. Dragon avoided interviews. The team locked the evidence, and Skinwalker Ranch quietly marked the area as restricted.
During a routine overnight experiment at Skinwalker Ranch, multiple cameras were rolling live. Not recreations, not reenactments, not dramatic television footage shot for entertainment purposes. Real-time surveillance capturing whatever moved through the monitored zone in complete darkness. This was not a planned test designed to provoke phenomena, not a scheduled experiment where researchers expected something to happen, and absolutely not something the team was prepared for or had protocols in place to handle. Something appeared inside the secure perimeter that night, something that triggered multiple sensors simultaneously, something that caused an immediate halt in all ongoing operations. The creature, entity, or unknown biological presence appeared for less than 30 seconds, long enough to be captured on camera from multiple angles, long enough to trigger alarm systems throughout the facility, long enough to make seasoned researchers, people who've spent years investigating unexplained phenomena, go completely silent. Skinwalker Ranch operates under constant surveillance that never stops, never sleeps, never takes a break. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, sophisticated monitoring systems track every single inch of the 512-acre property. Thermal imaging cameras detect heat signatures from anything warmer than the ambient environment. Motion sensors register movement down to the smallest animals, sensitive enough to detect rabbits and ground squirrels. Ground-penetrating radar maps subsurface activity looking for underground anomalies. Night vision towers provide overlapping coverage of the entire perimeter, eliminating blind spots. This isn't some weekend paranormal investigation team with handheld cameras and consumer equipment. This is a multi-million-dollar scientific operation funded by serious investors who demand results. Every system has redundancy. Every camera has backup power. Every sensor cross-references with other sensors to eliminate false positives and equipment errors. Unlike paranormal television shows that investigate locations for a few hours, then pack up their equipment and leave, Skinwalker Ranch experiments run continuously without interruption. Live camera feeds stream directly to a monitoring trailer where trained technicians watch screens in real time, day and night. Every alert gets logged with timestamps and sensor data. Every anomaly gets documented with multiple forms of evidence. Every sensor trigger gets cross-referenced with multiple independent systems to verify authenticity. The ranch operates on the fundamental principle that if something appears anywhere on the property, it will be recorded from more than one angle. Multiple cameras positioned at different elevations and distances. Multiple sensor types detecting different aspects of the same event. Multiple verification points ensuring that what's captured is real and measurable. Which means when something appears on these systems, when multiple sensors trigger simultaneously showing the same phenomenon, there's absolutely no room for equipment error, user mistake, or misidentification. It happened during late-night hours when minimal staff was present on the property. Just essential personnel monitoring standard surveillance systems from the command center. Nothing unusual had been scheduled for that evening. No experiments were actively running that would explain strange readings. No deliberate provocation of phenomena. Just routine observation of a property that's proven time and time again to be anything but routine. Then, the alerts started coming in. Motion sensors detecting movement in a specific sector, but thermal cameras showing no corresponding heat signature in that location. Then, thermal imaging picking up heat where nothing visible appeared on standard cameras. Audio sensors spiking with frequencies that had no identifiable source in the known animal database. The technicians monitoring the feeds initially assumed wildlife. A deer wandering near the perimeter fence looking for water. Maybe a coyote hunting for rabbits in the brush. Equipment errors happen even with the best technology. Environmental interference from weather patterns or unusual atmospheric conditions can trigger false readings on sensitive instruments. Standard operating procedure is to review the footage systematically, identify the source of the anomaly, log it in the database with explanatory notes, and continue monitoring for additional activity. But this time was fundamentally different from routine false alarms. One of the fixed position cameras positioned near the tree line captured movement that didn't match any known animal native to the Utah region. The shape moved wrong, biomechanics that didn't fit any cataloged species. The behavior patterns were wrong, actions that violated known wildlife psychology. Everything about what appeared on that screen violated the technicians' expectations of normal wildlife activity. And when they replayed the footage, when they watched it again in slow motion analyzing every frame, the realization hit them like physical impact. That wasn't a coyote. That wasn't a deer or elk. That wasn't anything they could easily identify or explain away. The footage shows a silhouette near the tree line at the property's eastern perimeter. Dark form against darker background of night vegetation. Movement that appears upright initially, human-like in posture and stance, suggesting bipedal locomotion. Then suddenly, without transition or awkward adjustment, it drops low to the ground, moving on all fours with fluid coordination that suggests this is natural for it. The head movement is what captures immediate attention and creates unease. Deliberate scanning motion, purposeful examination of the area, looking in specific directions as if searching for something particular or assessing its environment with intelligence. The timestamp is clearly visible in the corner of the frame. No jump cuts or editing transitions. No manipulation of the footage. Just continuous recording from a fixed position camera that had been running for hours before this moment and continued running for hours afterward. The tracking data shows the camera never moved, never panned, never zoomed. This is exactly what the lens captured. For approximately 23 seconds, the figure remains partially visible on camera, moving between areas of cover, using vegetation and terrain features strategically, pausing to look in specific directions with what appears to be deliberate observation. And then, according to the technicians who watched this event happen live in real time, the creature turns its head directly toward the camera position, as if it knows exactly where the surveillance equipment is located, as if it's aware of being observed and has identified the source of observation. It holds that position for 3 full seconds, long enough for the operators to realize they're not just watching something, they're being watched back by something that understands it's under surveillance. Then it moves behind brush in one fluid motion and disappears from view. No sound captured on the directional microphones. No breaking branches or rustling leaves. No footsteps registering on the ground-level audio sensors. Just there one moment, visible and present, then gone the next. The monitoring room reportedly went completely silent as the technicians processed what they just witnessed. One of the senior technicians, according to multiple sources who were present in the monitoring room that night, broke the heavy silence with a statement that would be repeated in every subsequent briefing and analysis session. "That's not a coyote." 3 simple words that summarized what everyone in that room understood instinctively and immediately. Whatever they just witnessed on their screens didn't match known wildlife patterns or behavior, didn't move like any animal species native to the Utah desert environment, and most disturbing, didn't behave in any way that fit conventional scientific understanding of how animals interact with human surveillance equipment and technology. The immediate protocol was activated without discussion. Secure all footage from every camera angle, log the precise timestamps down to the second, document every single sensor reading from every monitoring system, cross-reference all data points to build a complete picture, and notify the senior science team immediately regardless of the late hour. This wasn't something that could wait until morning. This required immediate expert analysis. The complete footage from all camera angles has never been publicly released in its entirety. Fragments have appeared in episodes of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch television series. Still frames have been shown during scientific presentations and conferences. Short clips have been included in documentaries, but the full 23 seconds of continuous footage captured from multiple camera positions with all accompanying sensor data, environmental readings, and audio recordings remains restricted from public viewing. The official explanations for withholding this evidence vary depending on who's asked and when. Ongoing investigations that could be compromised by premature public disclosure, risk of misinterpretation by viewers without scientific training that could fuel unfounded conspiracy theories, concern about potential public panic if the footage was presented without proper scientific context and expert analysis, and perhaps most significantly, complete inability to definitively classify or explain what the cameras actually captured that night. This pattern of selective disclosure and information control isn't unique to this particular incident. Past events at Skinwalker Ranch have followed remarkably similar trajectories over the years. Footage shown only in carefully edited fragments, with the most compelling or potentially disturbing portions removed. Sections deliberately blurred or obscured to prevent viewers from seeing specific details. Still frames presented instead of full video sequences to prevent frame-by-frame analysis by curious viewers and independent researchers. The question becomes unavoidable and increasingly difficult to dismiss. Was this footage withheld because researchers genuinely couldn't explain what it showed using conventional scientific frameworks? Or was it withheld because it showed too much? Because the implications of releasing clear, unambiguous footage of an unidentified creature moving through the property with apparent intelligence and awareness would create questions and controversies that nobody in positions of authority or responsibility wanted to manage or address publicly. Dr. Travis Taylor is not someone prone to exaggeration, sensationalism, or making claims beyond what evidence supports. As an aerospace engineer and optical scientist with decades of experience working on highly classified government programs requiring security clearances and rigorous scientific methodology, he approaches every single anomaly with deep skepticism and systematic analysis. His professional reputation, built over years of serious work, depends entirely on measured, careful, evidence-based conclusions, which makes his specific language choices about this incident particularly noteworthy and revealing. He never called it a creature in any public statement or interview, never used emotionally loaded terms like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or Skinwalker in his analysis. Instead, he referred to it consistently and deliberately as an unknown biological anomaly. Technical terminology, clinical description, deliberately neutral phrasing that avoids speculation. He emphasized repeatedly in every discussion that conclusions should be data-driven, not belief-driven or influenced by preconceptions. But here's what matters most and what reveals the significance of this event. In all his careful, meticulously measured statements about the incident, Dr. Taylor never once said it wasn't alive, never suggested it was simply misidentified wildlife that could be easily explained, never proposed a conventional explanation that would close the case and allow everyone to move on. His focus remained laser-focused on the empirical evidence. Multiple independent sensors confirming the same event from different positions, pattern behavior that strongly suggested environmental awareness and possibly intelligence, movement characteristics that appeared purposeful and deliberate rather than instinctive or reactive. In one particularly revealing interview, he made a statement that revealed more than any dramatic claim possibly could. When something reacts to being observed, when it demonstrates clear awareness of surveillance equipment and human presence, when it modifies its behavior based on that awareness, that's precisely when we pay very, very close attention to what we're dealing with. What happened in the minutes following the visual sighting is every bit as disturbing as the sighting itself, perhaps even more so. Approximately 7 minutes after the creature disappeared from all camera views, radiation detectors positioned around the property perimeter registered a measurable spike above baseline levels. Nothing immediately dangerous to human health, but definitely and undeniably elevated above normal background radiation. Temperature sensors strategically placed throughout the monitoring zone recorded a sudden, sharp fluctuation, dropping several degrees Fahrenheit in a highly localized area precisely where the figure had been visible moments before. Multiple pieces of sophisticated monitoring equipment experienced simultaneous interference that affected data collection across different types of systems. Not complete failures or total shutdowns that would suggest power problems, but subtle disruptions in normal functioning that degraded measurement accuracy. The troubling pattern that emerged. All these measurable effects occurred after the visual sighting, not before it, as would be expected. Normal wildlife encounters at monitoring stations follow an absolutely predictable sequence that's been documented thousands of times. Animals approach an area searching for food, water, or shelter. Their physical movement triggers motion sensors first. Their body heat registers clearly on thermal imaging cameras. Audio sensors pick up sounds of movement through vegetation, breathing, vocalizations. Visual cameras then confirm species identity through physical characteristics. Sensors always trigger first, providing advance warning before visual confirmation occurs. This incident at Skinwalker Ranch completely reversed that established sequence. Visual confirmation came first, with cameras capturing the creature before any other detection systems registered anything unusual. The figure appeared on screen moving through the monitored zone. Then, only after it had disappeared from view entirely, the sophisticated equipment began showing unusual and unexplained readings. That fundamental reversal troubled experienced researchers significantly. It suggested strongly that whatever they'd captured on camera didn't behave according to known physical and biological patterns, didn't interact with the environment the way flesh and blood animals predictably do. The folklore surrounding skinwalkers is ancient, specific, and genuinely disturbing when examined in detail. According to traditional Navajo beliefs that have been passed down through generations, skinwalkers are malevolent witches who possess the supernatural ability to transform into animals or take on animal characteristics while somehow maintaining complete human-level intelligence and awareness. They're said to mimic the appearance and behavior of animals and humans with unsettling accuracy, to appear near places where they're actively being observed, discussed, or investigated, to move fluidly between different physical forms with practiced ease. The reported characteristics of skinwalkers match disturbingly well with certain specific aspects of what the surveillance footage actually showed. Upright bipedal posture that transitions smoothly and naturally to quadrupedal movement without awkward adjustment. Sudden appearance and equally sudden disappearance without any detectable sound. Behavior strongly suggesting active awareness of being watched and recorded, as if the entity was consciously choosing to show itself. To be absolutely clear and avoid misrepresentation, the Skinwalker Ranch research team never officially labeled or classified what appeared on their surveillance cameras as a skinwalker according to traditional definition. They avoided that specific terminology very deliberately and consistently. Science demands empirical evidence and testable hypotheses, not reliance on cultural mythology or folklore, regardless of how compelling compelling the parallels might appear. But viewers of the footage, particularly those already familiar with the detailed Navajo legends and traditional stories, immediately made the obvious connection. The behavioral similarities were simply too striking, too specific, too numerous to casually ignore or dismiss. And the property itself, of course, bears the name Skinwalker Ranch specifically because of its extraordinarily long documented history of phenomena that closely matches indigenous descriptions of these entities going back many generations. Whether the creature captured on multiple cameras was actually a skinwalker, according to the precise traditional definition, remains fundamentally unknowable, but the undeniable fact that trained scientists with sophisticated equipment couldn't provide any conventional scientific explanation, that speaks volumes. The questions this incident raises are significantly more disturbing than any definitive answers could possibly be. Why did this particular creature or entity appear only once during continuous monitoring? In literally years of non-stop surveillance, capturing thousands upon thousands of hours of footage showing normal wildlife activity. Why does this specific unknown entity show up for exactly 23 seconds, then never appear again despite constant monitoring? Why specifically during active surveillance with multiple operators watching screens in real time? Was the timing purely coincidental chance? Or did it appear specifically and deliberately because sophisticated surveillance systems were actively operating and recording? Why did multiple sensors react measurably after the visual sighting rather than before, as would be expected with normal wildlife? What does that fundamental reversal of detection patterns suggest about its actual physical nature? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, did it know precisely where the cameras were strategically positioned throughout the property? Did it deliberately position itself to be captured on specific camera angles? Past detailed reports from Skinwalker Ranch, documented over decades by multiple independent research teams, describe entities and phenomena that consistently appear to avoid direct illumination from artificial light sources, that demonstrably react to being actively observed by withdrawing from view or significantly altering their behavior patterns, that manifest with notably increased frequency during active scientific experiments, as if somehow drawn by or responding to the investigation itself. This particular creature fits that well-established historical pattern almost perfectly, appearing specifically at night when natural visibility is severely limited and shadows provide concealment, staying deliberately at the extreme edge of camera range rather than moving confidently into well-lit, openly monitored areas, disappearing immediately the precise moment it seemed to recognize it was being recorded by multiple surveillance systems. The behavior strongly suggests intelligence and environmental awareness, suggests consciousness not just of its immediate surroundings, but specifically of human monitoring, capabilities, and surveillance technology, suggests clear intention behind its brief, calculated appearance, rather than random chance. This absolutely wasn't just a random animal wandering accidentally through the property. This surveillance footage doesn't constitute absolute proof of anything supernatural or paranormal in nature. It's definitely not a deliberate hoax, verified independently by multiple sophisticated systems and witnessed directly by credible professionals with scientific training and no motivation to fabricate evidence. But it's also not definitive, irrefutable proof of Bigfoot, skinwalkers, or any other specific cryptid from folklore or legend. What it genuinely represents is an unresolved moment captured in time, documented physical evidence of something unknown appearing at one of America's most intensively studied paranormal locations, something that multiple independent cameras captured from different angles simultaneously, something that triggered sophisticated sensors and monitoring equipment in measurable ways, something that trained scientists and experienced researchers couldn't conventionally explain using established scientific frameworks, and something that's never been seen again anywhere on the property despite years of continuous, comprehensive monitoring following the incident. No official explanation has ever been publicly released or made available. The footage exists in archives, but answers remain elusive.